Welcome home to USA Global TV and Radio. Ours is a place where dreams take flight, voices are heard, and stories are shared. This is where cultures meet, connections are formed, and ideas are transformed into action. This is your destination for authentic storytelling, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations. We're where global stories unite and bridges are built beyond all borders. Discover our world of education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. Together, we're building bridges worldwide. Subscribe to our USA Global TV channel and download our USA Global TV app. Be our guest or join our team. Visit usaglobaltv.com. With heartfelt thanks to our executive producer, Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck, music scored by Yifei Tang from Cloud Road Music, creative direction by Paul Garcia, and I'm Al Cini, and I'm very proud to be part of the USA Global TV and Radio family. So join us here at USA Global TV and Radio. Make us your home for global connection. All rights reserved. This video and its contents are the exclusive property of USA Global TV and Radio. Unauthorized use, duplication, or redistribution in any form is strictly prohibited. Thank you for being a part of our global community. Let's inspire together.
Where were you, if you were alive, on January 28th, 1986, or February, I believe it was the 3rd, 2003. Hey, Claire's with us. Hi, Claire. So I want to talk about NASA and what happened in 1986 and what happened in 2003 and why it could have been avoided. What could have changed and saved 14 people's lives. Welcome to You as a Whole, Body, Mind, and Soul. I'm Justin MIRIGLIANI. Great to have everybody here. Please chat in if you have any questions, comments. Where were you on those days? Can you remember? I remember where I was. I was in math class in 1986, 5th grade. And Kristen McAuliffe was going to be the first teacher in space. And for some reason, my school didn't have it on television, but we were talking about it. And then, of course, the accident that and I use accident, but honestly, it was avoidable. Accidents are usually things that just happen that are not avoidable, but this wasn't. And it's frustrating when you hear the stories, and I'll get into that a little bit today. And then in 2003, Columbia, it broke apart on re-entry into the atmosphere, and again, it was something that was totally preventable. We're talking about 17 years apart, and NASA didn't learn its lesson from the first one. So I want to get into that. And again, if you, where was I that day? I was dating someone, and we were at her house, and we were watching that at the time. And I remember the space shuttle was supposed to land, and it was late. Once the space shuttle's late, it's not going to be a good ending. Those things are timed exactly to the second. When there's a delay, something went horribly wrong. So let's start with Challenger. Back in 1986, this was the night before Challenger was supposed to launch. There were 4 engineers who told NASA, do not launch tomorrow. It was 40 years ago. A couple days ago. It was the 40th anniversary. And the reason why they said that was Roger Beaujolais, who was an incredible engineer. He worked on the O-rings, which the solid rocket boosters had to be sealed. They had some seams, and the seams had to be sealed so that gas and flame would not come out. It would block all that so it didn't burn through. And the year before, 1985, Roger Beaujolais went and took a look at the O-rings for a launch, and I believe it was also Challenger, because they had 4 shuttles. It was Challenger, Columbia, Atlantis, and I can't remember the other one, but there were 4 in the fleet. And Roger Beaujolais went and looked at the O-rings, and the launch that they had was in 53-degree weather down in Florida. That was the coldest launch ever recorded. When he looked at the O-rings, he could see that they had burn through. It was a backup. There was a initial O-ring, and then there was a backup in case one failed. You'd have one backing it up. But what happened with that one is the main O-ring failed, and the second one almost burned through, almost failed, but it didn't. And he took pictures of it, and he made it very clear that they had a problem with the O-rings. And in just a year later, in January of 86, the temperature was around 20 some degrees in Florida, just like this week. This week it's been incredibly cold in Florida. This was not as bad back then in 1986. It was bad, but it wasn't multiple days like it's been this time. But nonetheless, the temperature was very, very low. And the problem is when the O-rings when they were in freezing temperatures, even cold temperatures, they did not expand the way they should. And they were dangerous because they were going to allow gases to seep out and flames to seep out, and that was going to potentially cause a disaster. So when they got the weather report for the next day, they, at Morton Thiokol, the company that Roger Beaujolais worked for, they had a conference call with NASA. And Roger Beaujolais, Alan McDonald, Arnie Thompson, and Bob Ebling all told NASA, do not launch. They were all in agreement that NASA should not launch that shuttle the next day because of the cold temperatures, because they were afraid the O-rings would fail. And they had a conference call. And Morton Thiokol management was on board. They said, all right, if our engineers are saying that it's dangerous and there's going to be a catastrophe, we're going to go with that. And what did NASA do? NASA got angry and pushed back. And what NASA wanted to do was launch because there had been a lot of delays. This was when they were going to have the teacher in space, Krista McAuliffe. They had so many problems with mechanical issues and weather delays, and they were afraid that they were going to lose their funding. And all of this always comes down to money. Whenever you have any kind of cover up or any kind of problem like this, money is usually the reason why. And this was no exception. They were worried about losing funding, and they wanted to launch. So they said to the engineers, and when I say they, Lawrence Malloy was one of the big ones. He was part of the solid rocket booster on that committee for NASA. And he said, what do you want me to do, Thiokol? You want me to launch in the spring? So he was aggravated that they were telling him not to launch in cold weather. And they went offline. They talked about it. Morton Thiokol came back, and Morton Thiokol told the 4 engineers, take off your engineer hat, put on your management hat. So in other words, I know that you're afraid that people are going to get killed tomorrow. We're going to blow up that space shuttle. But think about it from a management point. What if you're wrong? What if it's fine and it doesn't have, there are no accidents, everything's good? They made them change their mind, and they wouldn't sign any papers. To their credit, Roger Beaujolais and Alan McDonald, Arnie Thompson, and Bob Ebling, none of them signed off. They had their manager do it because they knew that it was going to be very, very dangerous. And if they were going to get away with it, it was going to be luck. And almost was. But Roger Beaujolais went home and told his wife, Roberta, she said, how was your day? And Roger said, great, except we're going to kill 7 astronauts tomorrow. That's how sure he was that there was going to be a disaster the next day. But NASA refused to listen to the experts. And Morton Thiokol made a decision because they were afraid if NASA got upset with them, they would lose the contract with them, and then some other company would step in and they would make the solid rocket boosters. And it just came down to dollars and cents. And of course, we know what happened. Well, maybe some people don't know what happened. I mean, of course, most of us, if you were alive, you remember it. And if you weren't, you probably have heard of it. But Space Shuttle Challenger did not explode. It actually disintegrated because of an explosion. It was the shock waves, and the shuttle itself just broke apart. It didn't explode. What you saw in the explosion was the gases that exploded, and it kind of obscured the shuttle. The shuttle was behind that cloud of gases that was burning and then just broke apart. You just couldn't see it. In fact, a lot of speculation, and it's probably pretty good speculation, is that they did not die from that initial blast. The crew cabin was still intact when it was dislodged from the rest of the shuttle, and then it just fell to the ground. So the astronauts either A, were alive for a little while on the way down, or B, they were alive but unconscious, or C, they were alive and conscious. There's no way to really know for certain. But that's kind of hard to think about. If you 2.5 minute ride down, you can imagine what it must have been like to know that you're going to hit Earth at 200 and some miles an hour. I think it was 207 miles an hour into the water. You're not going to survive that. I mean, there's no way. And that's what happened. That's how they died, when they hit the water, most likely. But when you see interviews with these engineers, they talk about the fact that they thought they dodged the bullet, because when the shuttle was launched, they thought it was going to explode right on the pad. They thought that the O-rings were going to fail and the explosion was going to happen on the ground. It sort of didn't happen. And I know that sounds like a hedge, but it's the truth. The O-rings did fail on launch. You could actually see it when they isolate that area of the solid rocket boosters. One of them in the seams, one of the double O-rings failed. So both O-rings failed immediately. But they got lucky because they call it sludge, trapped that gas and held it so it didn't go through and burn the external tank. So it did not explode on launch, but it did take off slower than normal. They noticed that the takeoff was slower, but they thought they dodged a bullet. And I remember hearing interviews with them and them saying that they said a prayer and said, thank God that this we averted tragedy. And they were already thinking about how they were going to talk to NASA later about what to do in future shuttle launches. And then, of course, the sludge gave way, and like a welder's torch, flames were shooting out of that solid rocket booster, and it burned right into the external tank. And once it burned a hole in the external tank, that's when the explosion happened and the vehicle broke up. And every one of these guys, all these engineers, had pretty much the same reaction. They went into their offices and they cried because they knew that they were right and they could not do anything to save those 7 people. And somebody just said, Smarty Jones, 86. That was 1986. We watched that live in high school. Okay, yeah. A lot of people did. A lot of people who were younger, especially high school kids, were watching that. It was awful. Did they recover the bodies? Yes, they did recover the bodies. Unfortunately, they were not intact. The bodies were dismembered from the hitting the ocean so hard. So they were recovered. Most of them were fully recovered. Some of them were not. But yeah, these engineers were just devastated, and they couldn't believe that NASA wouldn't listen. And that's why I created a title, How Hubris and Disregard Led to the 2 Tragedies. Because I'll tell you about Columbia after this. NASA didn't listen to the experts. These guys were the experts. They were the engineers who created the solid rocket boosters. They were the ones who knew what the O-rings were and why they were there and how they worked. And NASA didn't want to hear it. NASA wanted to launch the shuttle because it would look bad. The optics wouldn't be good. We have to delay again. We're going to lose our funding. We're not going to be able to keep this going. The country's going to give up on us. The government is not going to want to keep pumping money into it if we don't get things done? For what? Now, even if you didn't care about the 7 astronauts, even if you were NASA and you're like, well, we have a bunch of astronauts, which obviously is horrible thinking, but if they were thinking that way, why would they risk a $1.2 billion, that's 1986 dollars, $1.2 billion space shuttle? For what? You can't wait a couple days? You think Florida is going to stay 30 degrees for weeks? It's going to be another week, another couple days. It's going to warm up. Why not just wait? They had a rush, and it led to, most importantly, 7 people dying. And then secondly, the loss of that humongously expensive machine. And that was a quarter of their fleet. 4 shuttles, now you're down to 3. That's a pretty big hit. But it was just the arrogance, hubris, not wanting to listen, which led to this, which it was completely avoidable. It was completely avoidable, but they did not take into consideration how dangerous it was when they were told by the people who knew better. And then afterwards, they try to cover it up. The Rogers Commission is what it was called, where I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Rogers. He had the commission to find out what happened in the accident. And it turns out that there was just a complete lack of regard for personal safety, for the chain of communication was terrible. So trying to get messages up through the channels through NASA was just awful, and they found that they were wrong. Now, Lawrence Malloy tried to play it off that he didn't think it was going to be a problem, and Morton Thiokol changed their mind. Morton Thiokol's management changed their mind. That's different than the engineers changing their mind. When they tell you take off your engineer hat and put on your management hat, what they're saying is make the customer happy no matter what. Even if it's going to cost 7 people their lives, we got to take a chance on that, because otherwise we could be out. And that's where it was. And for a lot of those guys, especially Roger Beaujolais, who I never got to meet Roger, but I know his brother Rick. Rick Beaujolais is a great guy. That's a great family. But Roger Beaujolais' life was really, really ruined after that. All of them were really treated horribly by Morton Thiokol. They were taken off of their projects, and they were given smaller jobs that they should never have been in, that were jobs that they were way, way more qualified to do other things. They gave them some minor jobs, and really what they wanted to do was quit. That's ultimately was the goal, is to get them out. And they went through a lot, Roger especially. I don't know the other guys, but through Rick, I know Roger went through a tremendous amount. He went through a nervous breakdown, severe depression. His wife Roberta, same thing. She went through it as well. His kids, Darlene and Norma, had to go through that too. And it was tough. And then if you hear interviews with the astronauts' families, they had to deal with the fact that NASA did not put the welfare of their family members above prestige, above money. So this is again where, why don't we listen to the experts? Why don't we take a step back? If many people who are experts are telling you something, maybe it's time to listen. Now, NASA said they learned their lesson in 1986. They didn't launch another shuttle until 1988, I believe. So they were down for a little over 2 years, and they finally launched a shuttle. And they kept launching shuttles. And pretty soon they were getting to the point where the shuttle was no longer cost effective. They were going to create newer rockets with more technology, better technology, because the shuttles were actually built in the late 70s. So the technology was changing. In 2003, one of the last flights of the shuttles was Space Shuttle Columbia. and Columbia was probably, I think at the time, the most used. It was the workhorse of the fleet. Challenger had been before this. Columbia became the workhorse of the fleet. One thing that they were concerned about was the foam insulation that protected against the wings being hit by anything. There was foam around the wings, and when the space shuttle took off, they were noticing that the foam would break off, and many times it just missed the shuttle itself. And because it missed the shuttle itself, it became normalized that was a risk worth taking. They normalized the risk. They said, well, you know what? We've had this happen before. It did not cause a big problem, so it probably won't again or ever, because it hadn't at all. Well, in 2003, when Columbia took off in February of 2003, or maybe late January, the foam came off and it hit the wing. And little did they know at the time, but it put a big hole in the wing. Now, the shuttle launched and made it up into space through the atmosphere up into space, and really the orbiting around space was fine. The shuttle wasn't having any problems that they noticed. But on the ground, what the astronauts didn't know was that Sean O'Keefe, who was the head of NASA at the time, and Linda Ham, who I can't remember what her title was, but I just remember her being involved. Linda Ham actually spoke to the crew and told them everything's fine. Just want you to know. They sent him an email, because at that time they had we had email. In 1986, we didn't with Challenger, but Columbia had email in 2003, and they sent an email to Rick Husband, who was the captain, and they said, look, when you come down, there's probably going to be talk about we got a message here. I think we're okay audio wise. I think we are okay. Somebody saying the mic can't hear, but Megan, you can let me know in the chat if that's the case. I'll take a look and see what's going on. But yep, we're okay. Cool. So they had email, and they sent an email to Rick Husband, and the email said, when you get down, you'll probably hear some questions about the foam hitting the wing. Just want you to be aware of it. This poses no threat to you or the crew. Something to that effect. I don't have it quoted verbatim, but that was the gist of the email. And that wasn't true. They were worried about it. In fact, Linda Ham and Sean O'Keefe and a lot of other people in NASA were actually thinking about possibly going up there with another shuttle. I think it was Atlantis, which was ready to launch in a month. And they were going to try to hurry up and get it launched to try to rendezvous with Columbia so they could get the astronauts out of Columbia and get them back home in Atlantis. And they were discussing that. And this had been going on for days in NASA. They knew that this was a chance that this could happen, but they didn't want to admit it. They didn't want to slow down. They didn't want to make the necessary provisions to make sure that everybody would be safe. The crew, most importantly, shuttle, second most importantly. They just normalized it. They said, well, you know, it's a risk that we have to live with. It's not a very high risk. They were told otherwise. So while this crew is up in space, they're deciding whether they're going to tell them or not that they might not make it through reentry. And they decided not to, because they thought, well, why make them worry? Let them have a good flight. If they don't make it, at least we wouldn't have worried them ahead of time, because there's nothing that can be done anyway. I mean, could you imagine people that you just launched them up into space and you probably have killed them? They're the walking dead at that point, because they're on that shuttle that you are pretty sure is not going to make it back. But they hit it. And then in February of '03, when they were about to come home, they started to come in, and there was a hole in the wing, as I said before. And once there's a hole in the wing and that heat is able to go in, the heat from reentry, it's just a matter of time. And it just started to burn up and it broke apart. And the crazy thing is, and if you think about how terrifying it must have been, that shuttle started to rock, it started to spin, it started to go end over end. And at that speed, it just started to break apart. So they knew in the beginning of it, the astronauts knew that they were dead. They knew that something horrible was happening, and they probably didn't live long, but I'm sure they were terrified for the time that they were alive. And then it broke up over several states, Texas, Louisiana. I can't remember all the states where it dropped pieces of the shuttle falling to the ground, but it was all over the place. It was terrible. And again, that's when I was watching it, they were saying that the shuttle's late. And again, that's the shuttle can't be late. It just can't be late. It's precise. Everything's precise. When a shuttle's late, that means there's a catastrophe of some sort. And there was. It broke apart. And I remember I was, 27, 28? 28. And I remember thinking to myself, even as a young guy, 28 years old, how in the world did they not learn from the first time in '86? How is it possible that people that smart, people that accomplished, could make the same mistake twice? Now, it was a different type of mistake. One was the O-rings, the other one was the foam strike. But was it different? No. What was different is the part of the shuttle that caused the problem. But what was the same lack of attention, the same disregard for human life, the same inability to see beyond their own hubris. We're NASA. We know everything. We're the best. We're the best. We can't be told. We know it all, but you don't. And that's why they said it couldn't have been the phone. Couldn't have been. They knew it was the phone. They knew it was the phone because they were talking about this through the week. So this is not a shock. And then they had some experts do some experiments to see what would happen if foam hit a wing at a certain speed. They calculated the speed, and I think it was 500 miles an hour or something like that. The foam was pretty much standing still, but the shuttle actually hit the foam. So the foam didn't really hit the shuttle. The shuttle flew into the foam. The foam was kind of suspended, and then it got hit. So the speed was very high. So they did an experiment where they fired an air gun with foam at a wing, and it blew a hole in it. And they looked at the hole and they said, well, there it is. There's your answer. That's exactly what happened. It's just frustrating to me that people who know better are disregarded because other people think, well, I know better than them. One of the things I always say to people is trust the experts. That's why they're the experts. When I have an illness, when I had ulcerative colitis and had to have surgery, I didn't want to hear it that I needed surgery. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody says, wow, this is going to be awesome. But I knew better than to say to a doctor, no, I'm sorry, I think you're wrong. Why? Because I'm not an expert. The doctor was the expert. And the doctor said you need surgery or you stand the chance of dying, having colon cancer. So I had the surgery. And NASA just didn't get the memo on that. That when experts tell you something, sometimes you have to swallow your pride, and maybe it's not what you want to hear, but you got to listen. anyway. And they did it twice because they were warned about the phone strikes. They were told not to launch until that was taken care of, until they figured out a way to make it safer so that that phone would not come off and hit the wing, or any other part of the shuttle for that matter. But again, they overlooked it because it was not for business, wasn't better for them. Roger Beaujolais went on to teach ethics in business after the tragedy with Challenger. He went to schools. He taught at colleges, I think in Utah. He was originally from Massachusetts. I think it was Massachusetts. I know it was New England area. But he went, when he moved out to Utah, where Mort Thiokol is, he then became a professor out there. And he taught how you have to be ethical, how you have to think of human life before profit, how you have to listen to people who know what they're talking about, not try to shut down the whistleblowers. Being punished for speaking out is dangerous, because if you don't have people speak out, you will have more and more accidents like you saw with Challenger and Columbia. It's inevitable, because there's nobody there that's going to stand up and say, hey, this isn't right. Because if they have to fear going through what Roger did and what Alan did and what Bob did and Arnie, a lot of people are not going to have the guts to do it. Those four guys did. And Roger was the main guy in that. And look at what it cost him. He was a whistleblower. It cost him his job. It cost him his mental health. It cost him money. The amount of money he should have been able to make, the earning potential that he had was astronomical, and he couldn't make that. It hurt his family. I've talked to his brother, Rick, about maybe doing a documentary on Roger and what it was like for him and what his thoughts were about NASA. And I respect Rick's wishes. He said, I don't think we should do it because it brings up a lot of pain in his family. And he said it would be better off if we did not do it. And I haven't pushed it because I know that I'd rather not do it and respect the family's wishes. On the other hand, I think somebody like that needs to be celebrated. I think every year when I post on Facebook about Challenger, it's always about Roger Beaujolais. We all know the tragedy. If you were alive, or if you have family who was alive, maybe people under a certain age won't remember. That was 40 years ago, so it's a long time ago. But the story of Roger Beaujolais is one that is kind of buried. Even 60 Minutes did a report about Challenger, and they interviewed Roger, but they interviewed him. They aired maybe a couple of minutes, maybe 2 minutes of the interview. They followed him around for days. They were at his house, and 60 Minutes did not play much of his interview, very, very little, which is a shame because there was a lot to be learned there. In fact, I talked to Rick. We were going to meet in New York and go to CBS to see if we could get the raw footage from that 60 Minutes episode. And then Rick decided that wasn't a great idea. And again, I respected the family's wishes. I wasn't going to push that. I wish we had it. I wish we were able to share it so people would see. I am a spiritual person, and I wrote this past January 28th that I really think, as upset as Roger was, and as much as he suffered because he tried to do the right thing, I really believe that when Roger passed away and he went up to heaven, I believe there were seven people standing there in their astronaut uniforms, their astronaut suits, just clapping to welcome them into heaven. And I think that's where he found his peace. I hope, anyway. That's what I hope. And I really believe that. I think that those astronauts know what he did and what he tried to do to save their lives, and it didn't go unrecognized. NASA didn't recognize it, but the people who should have been saved recognized it. I believe. Now, that could just be wishful thinking on my part, but that's what I believe. I just hope that people learn to do the right thing, even when it's not the easiest thing to do. And I've had that in my life too. My father has done several things, and my mother. They've done several things where it wasn't the easiest thing to do to just go along with the rest of the group and kind of pretend like everything's okay, but actually stand up and say, "Nah, you know what? This isn't right. I'm not going to allow this, or at least I'm not going to be a part of it." And that's what these four guys did, and Roger was the leader of it. They said, "No, this is not right." And then you have the people who are all totally the opposite. Lawrence Malloy, who, when do you want me to launch? In the spring? They're trying to be intimidating, trying to flex muscle so that other people will be afraid to stand up. Or Linda Ham with Columbia. Just tell them, yeah, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. And then meanwhile, they're having conversations on the ground about how we're going to get them down. Well, then you know they're not fine. It's just, again, frustrating to see that. I hope everybody learns from this. It's easy to do something when there are no repercussions. It's so hard to do it when there are repercussions. So I think it's Dr. Jacqueline. Recently, I was sharing with senior level executives that a tragedy occurred in a remote location of a publicly traded company. People died at work. I was called out by one of the executives who asked, "Do you think the CEO cares?" This is exactly what I'm talking about. Exactly what I'm talking about. No. Do I think the CEO cares? Maybe some do, but I think for the most part, no. I think they don't. I think stakeholders, same thing. Stakeholders, stockholders, if they're making money, then people are expendable in their eyes. I don't agree with that, but that's the way it is. If it's ever a choice between do the right thing or make the most money is going to win probably 95% of the time, if not more. That's not a scientific poll, but from experience, I can tell you that that's probably pretty close. Another one I could think of was there was a company who made hot tubs, and all they had to do to keep it safer was have a 5-cent screw that would keep people from, and this little guard that would keep people from, especially women and girls, getting their hair stuck in it and sucked under. They didn't want to do it because the 5-cent bolt or screw, whatever it wasn't worth doing. Well, you know what? It was worth doing because they got sued because somebody died from their hair being sucked in and then drowning from it. Why? You wound up paying more money in the long run anyway. Why wouldn't you just do it preemptively? Why would you wait? So Dr. Eklund says she was shocked. He told me I would not make it in corporate as a C-level exec. You know what? Then I wouldn't either. Because I'm not going to let people die because we want to make extra money. So no. And guess what? If that's what it takes to be a C-level exec, keep it. The one other thing, I know we're running out of time. Trying to think what lost my train of thought there. I bet you were shocked. Yeah, it is shocking when they say that. Oh yeah, the bridges here in Philadelphia. My uncle worked on the bridges, and for a long time they did not have a divider between north and southbound traffic, so they would just go, and there were a bunch of head-on collisions. Now, the reason why they didn't put in a barrier between them after tons and tons of accidents was very simple. Because if they put a barrier in between in north and southbound lanes, they're admitting that they should have one in the first place. And all of these accidents that happened before, those people would sue or sue on behalf of the family. That is why they wouldn't put in a barrier. So more people had to die because they didn't want to get sued. My uncle thought it was wrong. It was wrong. So as I wrap up, all I'm saying is I'm not trying to bash NASA, although they deserve a little bit of bashing. But you got it. Ethics have got to be greater than profit. It has to be. If it's not, we wind up with a really, really dangerous situation. All right, everybody. I want to thank you for watching today and look forward to seeing you next week at the same time. Have a great week.
Get ready to wear the brand that's changing the world of media. Introducing the official USA Global TV and Radio online store. From our TV show hosts to our incredible global guests, you asked, we delivered. Rep your appearance with pride. Whether you've been on air, hosted a show, or tuned in, we have something just for you. Visit us at usaglobaltvradioshoп.myspreadshop.com and start shopping today. Check back frequently. We're dropping fresh new designs all the time. Showcase your role in our global community. These designs celebrate your voice, your story, your presence. It's more than just merchandise. It's a movement of hope, inspiration, education, and elevated listening. Head to usaglobaltvradioshoп.myspreadshop.com. Your spotlight awaits. USA Global TV and Radio. Elevate your style. Elevate the world.
In a noisy world, true connection begins with listening. Elevated listening transforms every conversation in just 5 simple steps. Pause and breathe. Set your intention. Listen with curiosity. Reflect back. Agree on one next step. Join the Listening Mentor on Let's Finally Talk with Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck, the Listening Mentor, where we help you find inner peace, one conversation at a time. Streaming every day. Let's Finally Talk TV show with Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck, only here on USA Global TV and Radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channels to watch and engage with all our content.
Thank you, viewers and listeners of USA Global TV and Radio, for joining us today. We're honoured to have your time and attention as part of our global community. At USA Global TV and Radio, we believe in the power of authentic conversations.